Welcome to this episode of the Smart Leaders Sell podcast. I'm Jessica Lorimer, sales coach and leadership expert, and I am really excited to dig down into today's episode. Okay, Poddies, isn't this exciting? We now have Brian Fanzo on the show. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
I'm very excited about this. I'm also excited that in April, I'm going to get to touch you in person. Not inappropriately. I just want to throw that out there, guys. Not inappropriately, but I get to have this conversation with you and then potentially give you a hug as well. That's very exciting.
That's my favorite thing in the world, turning, digital handshakes into hugs and selfies. So I look forward to seeing you in Newcastle, no doubt.
I'm very excited. Hopefully they will have the karaoke. I was last up in Newcastle for Retain Live, and they had a karaoke bar afterwards. And a few of us who were speaking, we got together and did some karaoke. So maybe we can hit up the mic.
I've never been shy to turn away from karaoke, so that sounds like fun.
Perfect. Well, I'm really excited to have you on the show. And it's actually a rare occurrence for me to have somebody on the show who has come from the background that you have in terms of the business that you run. Now, you guys weren't exposed to our pre-show chat, but we were just having quite an interesting conversation about the fact that Brian built his business with corporate contracts in the bag and built his social media influence alongside. Whereas I kind of went the other way. I built my online brand first when I came out of the corporate world. And then I've moved into showing people what I did in corporate. So would you like to talk us through that, how this all started?
Sure. So yeah, and I love this is part of the beauty of the world we live in today, is that, carving out your path to business success can be really as unique as you want it. And I think that's, part of the things that I preach a lot. I like to say I don't have a niche in the sense of, the traditional sense, while at the same time, I advise clients that if they have a niche, to double down and own it. But if they don't, they're okay, finding a way to success. You just have to do it a little differently. And my kind of path was definitely a little differently in that sense. I worked for the US government in cybersecurity for about 9 years. And realized I didn't want to stay in the government space for although I loved the job. And a lot of my job was driving collaboration across the different branches of military. And my dream job since I left university was to be a technology evangelist, kind of modeled after what Guy Kawasaki did at Apple. And I was able to do that at a data center company in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was a startup. It was a booming startup that we were hiring 12 new hires a week.
Wow.
And yeah, it was wild. I was there for 2 years and 10 days, and I was the 256th employee. And when I left, I think we had 610 employees.
And that must be a crazy environment to grow in, because all of that growth, that's high pressure environment.
It was. And on top of that, it was a traditional data center that was moving into the cloud. So a lot of the legacy employees had to decide, are they going to now operate in this new environment? And interestingly enough, the culture divide and the culture difficulties we had were also the same difficulties our clients were having, because they were also going through the same struggle of how to move things that were traditionally real estate. You buy servers, you get all of these things, to this new cloud-based environment, which in 2020, everything is cloud-based, and we don't even think about those days. But it was an interesting time, and during that time, I became kind of the face of that brand. I started to do more speaking and started to kind of get recognized outside the landscape. And in 2014, I was recognized by The Economist as one of the top 25 social business leaders of the future.
Wow.
And it was a really cool honor. There's lots of, you can get lots of awards, lots of things that get thrown at you, but this one really changed the course of what I was doing. And they actually teamed up with IBM and brought me out to these different IBM events. And I went to a couple TED Talks. I got to do these collaborative sessions with the other 25 leaders that they had identified from all these different corporate walks of life. And for me, it was really this exposure to, almost, I wouldn't say the entrepreneur world, but it was an exposure to, putting your stuff out there to the world rather than the idea of, what you're working on, you let your work do the talking for you type mindset. And so around that same time, the company I was working for was going through the idea of getting purchased and getting bought. And the company that was buying them didn't see much value in someone that had an evangelist role. And so it was actually, that was the kick for me to become an entrepreneur. And thankfully for me, the CEO I had at that company and the team I had there, they actually became my first clients as an entrepreneur, giving me a little bit of a golden parachute, a little bit of a blanket to get into the real world. But when I jumped into this entrepreneur space and kind of building my brand at the same time, I always use this as a reference. Like November 2nd, 2013 is a day that I decided my mom had pretty much called me out saying that I wasn't being my true self online. And she thought from her mom's point of view that was my struggle with putting things on social media, putting things out there. And she was 100% right. At the time, I didn't want to believe that she was right. But
it's always irritating. Mums are never wrong.
It is. Moms are like that. But I'm a mama's boy at heart, so it's okay on that side. But November 2013, I started putting my story out there. January, I got this award. I got to travel through that, the springtime. And then that summer, it was kind of pushed into entrepreneurship. And I tried my handle at agency life in the traditional marketing sense. And I quickly realized within a couple months that style of work, that style of relationship just really wasn't natural for me. But at the same time, the influencer side of my world was kind of growing with the exposure that the award had given me. I had started attending a lot of, IBM events, SAP events, got sent to South by Southwest, Mobile World Congress. And so I kind of was fluxed into this position where I was, telling my story and sharing these things about who I was and what I was doing, while at the same time, really my 100% business focus was on these corporate clients that were hiring me both as an influencer and as kind of like a thought leader speaker. And, for me, I remember thinking about it and saying, you know what, I'm going to build a community that will be so vibrant and so connected that they'll follow me no matter where I go, because I don't know where I'm going. But I will leverage the fact that the corporate audiences that I'm working with, they want access to this type of community, but they don't have it. And so I strategically early on made it a point to not have any products, anything that cost any money. I didn't even have a lead magnet on my email for my community, trying my best to be as organic and as focused on giving as I humanly could. And so that was kind of that 2013, 2014 into 2015 journey. And since then, that's where my business has really kind of continued to grow. Now I'm a full-time keynote speaker as my primary source of revenue. And so I speak at large corporate events, corporate, summits and such and so on. But then I do influencer work, influencer strategy work, where brands want to either sponsor my podcast, work with me to have access to my community. So it's this beautiful harmony. And so that's why I loved our banner at the beginning, because there is something beautiful about being able to understand both. And I've made plenty of mistakes. I can tell you, not understanding how to train my community on purchasing from me, not, building the email, lots of little mistakes where I was so organically building my online space that Gary Vaynerchuk called me out one time and he said, Brian, I know you love my book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. He's like, but you forgot the right hook part of it.
And Gary Vee ever said that to me, I'd be like, wow.
Yeah, it was a very humbling experience. We were standing outside in the street. He was waiting for an Uber and we were just kind of talking. And I remember like walking back and was like, oh man, he's 100% right. And it's something to this day, I still have to work on kind of adjusting, but it's also kind of a product of the business I've been building.
I'd actually love to dig into that. So I have a theory and I call this baby bird syndrome. So if you've been a poddy for a while, and that's what we call our podcast listeners, just as an FYI, you'll have heard me talk about baby bird syndrome a lot. And the way that I always talk about it is that when we come online, a lot of people are told to just give value, give value, give value. And at that point, they kind of train their audience into becoming baby birds. You become the mama bird, you rock up to the nest. Every time they're cheaping, you give them a worm. And then eventually the mama bird gets kind of tired of this, and the online marketer in us wants to get paid. And at that point, we kick the baby birds out of the nest. Maybe we ask them to invest in something, maybe we ask them to pay for a product or service. And suddenly we get two reactions. Either we get the crickets and people just suddenly run away, never to be heard from, until we offer out the next free thing. Or we can get this kind of aggressive almost response where people feel very aggrieved and upset that you're not just going to show up and give them free stuff anymore. A bit like when you kick a baby bird out of the nest and it suddenly realizes, oh my God, I have to fly. And so the only way really to combat that now is to sell transparently right from the beginning of your business. But obviously in 2013, 2014, it was a different landscape. So, you kind of grew in this landscape where actually giving value, we used to say, build it and they will come. And that's shifted quite drastically over the last 6 years.
Without question. And I love the way you link that. And it's true. I'm actually living proof of what you're saying there. And for me, the one element that was probably the most telling about that kind of mindset was and this is me being very transparent because that's part of what I've built my brand on is, I'm very uncomfortable selling myself and selling to those that I feel I can give value to, in a sense where, the exchange isn't even at the time, either because I don't believe they can afford it, or I don't believe that the value link is there. And it was a personal struggle for me. And it was also something that, if I had to examine, my career and my path, in the corporate world as well as in the startup world that I was in, my role in pretty much all of those positions was to execute and give value at a level that was above and beyond what our contract or what our existing relationships kind of told, while at the same time not being tied to any KPIs, not being tied to any exchange of money or sales quotas. And so for me, 15 years into my career, after leaving university, and to never having a role that was truly exposed to either traditional sales and marketing, or understanding how the value of that. And for me, it was telling when certain people would come to me and say, Brian, I want to spend money with you, I just don't know how. Or even even worse was, Brian, what can I purchase from you? Like, you've changed my business. Like, you don't have anything for me to purchase. And that to me is definitely a sign of what you were saying. And a little bit of the times, there was a little bit of an adage, I think 2013, 2014, those that were kind of highlighted as the great internet marketers in that space, and this is no shun on them, I looked at them as a very, the online course world was so different back then as well. It was very shady in the sense of who you could believe, what they were selling, what backed up what they were selling. And so much of it, especially because social media was so new, so much of it was, like, I remember seeing a lot of courses on how to get more followers, and then learning that they were purchasing the followers in the back end. And that's how they were, and so for me, the evolving world that we're living in, if I was doing it over again in 2019, 2020, without hesitation, I would have taken the approach of truly building in that idea of, hey, I'm giving value, but these are the ways that we are going to, purchase and bring you along on this journey with me. Because it does get to a point where, I definitely have separated my two businesses, and now having to go back in and kind of reverse engineer that, it's definitely been a difficult scenario.
And I think what's so inspiring about that is that, particularly for everybody listening, because I have a lot of people who are former corporate employees, they're now looking to build their own businesses. Perhaps they're selling to corporates, perhaps they're doing the whole online marketing thing. But the interesting thing is that a lot of them don't come from that sales and marketing background that I do. You know, I love selling things. I would sell literally anything. You give me anything and I'll sell it to somebody because I just enjoy it. And it comes to me now as naturally as I breathe. But it doesn't come like that to everybody. And it is a harder start for some people. But I think, you know, the piece about your journey that is awesome is that not only have you kind of combated whatever you found difficult around selling to people and that fairer exchange of value, but you were doing this for huge organizations. You know, you've worked with some of the world's arguably biggest brands, you know, brands like Adobe or IBM and Dell and things like that. And that's a huge stage to start your sales career.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, right? And it's funny because to me, the value add that I could instantly convey with them was a no-brainer, right? And I could pitch, I could work. I knew that I would over deliver. I knew that not only that I felt like they could afford it, but I would help them move a business needle, even compared to some of the others that they were hiring alongside of me. And yet the limitation existed for me doing the same when I was trying to work with the more traditional entrepreneur or small business space. And it's a funny juxtaposition. You know, I think of it kind of like a speaker as well. For me, when I'm coaching speakers, I always tell them that the larger the audience, the easier it is. And for most people, especially because we know the fear of public speaking is so great, they're like, that doesn't make sense. And I always, equivalent to the fact that, in a giant room, maybe you're only going to get 20% of the room to laugh. And if 20% of a giant room laughs, it sounds pretty good for you as a speaker. If you're in a small room and there's 20 people and 20% of the room laughs, it's like crickets. It's a very, that distance is so shrunk. And I think for me that I kind of associated that into my business. But I also think there's a beauty today, probably more so than any time. And I've been writing a lot about this in the sense of, how are we transparent and vulnerable, yet still are able to maintain our authority? And I think the beauty of that is in that online business world is that, so much of that is built on trust and testimonials, and, the proof is in what you're actually accomplishing. And it's much easier to do that outside of the corporate space, right? Like I worked with IBM on deploying, social business, employee advocacy and influencer marketing programs. And it started with one department for a year, and then it was 2 departments, then it was 4. Then we kind of got kicked back down to 2 and then back down to 1. And anyone in the corporate world knows that. And so I think it's interesting today. I do feel like the leverage there that I would have associated with the corporate world only existed back then. I believe now they're kind of married, which is kind of a beautiful kind of harmony between the two.
I love that. And I think the other interesting thing that I want to pull in on there is that I love your analogy first off about the stage thing. And I'm definitely going to think about that at Atomicon. I'd never ever put that together. And I've spoken on quite a few stages over the last few years. So I'm just going to aim for the 20% in the room to laugh. That's a great way to think about it. But for the people out there listening thinking, but I'm only one person, what would a corporate buy from me? Because that's something I hear quite a lot. People say, but I'm only one person, and corporates only buy from big organizations. And it's one of the things that often puts them off selling to corporates, especially when everybody can get a Facebook account now. And everyone can sell to another individual, whether it's, Tupperware or leggings or coaching or marketing services or whatever that looks like. And a lot of people feel unworthy perhaps of the sale. And that's something you've kind of talked about over the course of this episode, is that value exchange. Am I not potentially about it being good enough, but is it worth it? Can they afford it? Etc. etc. What would you say to those people who are thinking, well, why would an organization like a big brand, like an Apple or something, why would they be interested in little old me?
So I love the way you position that, and it kind of sets me up perfectly for the way that I look at that, is that for me, working with large organizations like IBM and Dell and a lot of the companies I've worked with, I've never once approached it as if I was working with the company. And I think this is part of it. My success has really been, how do I find a change agent or someone within the company that identifies a business value or a business goal that I can help them accomplish? And so when I approach corporate work, I don't ever really think about it as like, what are the problems I'm solving for IBM? I identify and say, okay, Amber, who is running this team, has this social business initiative to accomplish these goals. This is the value I can provide Amber. And these are ways that I can make Amber look good to her superiors. And for me, that was been my number one secret has been, I really look for, and this is also kind of a way to kind of think of it as well. Most of my ins to brands that I've worked with doesn't come through the traditional, I'm very good friends with lots of CMOs, lots of executives, lots of good friends with lots of, I would say middle managers that are, doing some great work. But a lot of my ins into brands, a lot of times came either with the entry level employee that wanted to do great things, that was looked at as a trusted resource of, hey, who do you know that's doing great things? Or I would come through the executive side, building that relationship to where they were selling down to, a manager. Hey, I want you guys to work with Brian. Brian can provide great value. And it really made it easier for me because they knew that I had, the trust and buy-in from their boss. Therefore, working with them directly kind of allowed that, the kind of that spotlight. But I will tell you, I've also had plenty of experience where if you don't have that internal advocate, you don't have that connection with an internal person, you do become a number on a sheet full of lots of numbers that you can easily become, disposable. And I think one of my, the advices or lessons learned that I've had in that space is never putting all of your eggs in one corporate basket, right? And one of my big pushbacks early on was in 1 year, I did 16 IBM events.
Wow.
Different thing, from an influencer work to giving a presentation to running a workshop, to just being an influencer, myself and amplifying the event. And I had, Dell had come to me at the time and asking to work with me. And then through our discussion came back and said, well, there's too much IBM in your
Oh,
feed
wow.
and in your world for us to work with you. And I kicked back to them and said, the reason IBM is in my feed is because I'm working with them. And the reason you want to work with me is you want that same exposure of what I'm giving IBM. And I was like, I firmly believe that I am agnostic to one brand, and that if, siloing my focus or, what I'm working on to just one corporate company would do an injustice for my brand, the trust that I built with my community. And I really made it a commitment over the next 6 to 9 months to prove that to Dell. And I can tell you, almost a year to the date of that first conversation, I was hired to host Dell EMC World, one of the largest events Dell puts on in the world. And to me, it was a testament to believe in the fact that, part of the value that you can provide as the single, entity outside of the corporate world is your ability to provide that third-party validation, your access to other brands. And for me, in 1 year, I worked with IBM, Dell, SAP, Hewlett Packard, and Oracle in 1 year. And, that's not bragging about the brands I'm working with. It's more of this ability to, where else could I possibly work with brands that technically are competitors in many ways, they're partners in many ways as well. But it's that beauty of having, having your internal champion inside of the organization, but also a commitment to where your unique value is. Because I do see friends, and even actually someone that I've been mentoring the last year or so, one of the things that he has always struggled with is that when he does commit to one of the brands, he almost puts blinders on to everything else that everyone's doing. And I remind him that's kind of, you become a corporate employee that's just not on their normal payroll. And it is a hard disconnect. At least it has, it's been what's been successful for me.
I really love that. And there are two things that I think are really important in what you've just said. So one is about the internal advocate. So I call that internal championship. And when
Yes.
we talk to my clients, I'm always like, you've got to have 3 to 5 people in a big organization who would champion you for a project that they're working on, or take you to the board and say, yes, we want this person to come in, and we would stand by a proposal that they create or a solution that they want to provide, because we believe that they are the credible partner. And I really love what you say there about not becoming a number because you have that internal champion. You don't become a cog in a wheel, because ultimately you have that person to person or human to human relationship. And that's one of the biggest things that came out of the hiring manager panel when we did the Converting Corporates 2019 event last year. Was we had a bunch of hiring managers there from different companies. And the biggest takeaway that everyone had was when one of our hiring managers said, at the end of the day, you're always talking to a human at the end of the phone. If you be human to us, we will be human to you. And that will help stop you becoming that number in the wheel. So I really like that. I think the second thing there is that piece around working with potential competitors, potential collaborators. Those are some of the world's biggest tech brands, hardware and software. And I think that it's really interesting for people, because oftentimes we can get so caught up in what we're doing with one company or who is paying us at that moment in time that we actually forget business development. We forget to take that in other directions. And that's business development in terms of who else could we be working with, but also business development in how else could we be building our business alongside this. So many people spend time in the business but not on the business, and that's what I
Yes.
really like about your journey, is that the whole time that you spent in your career, you were building up this follower base and this kind of community base of people who were really genuinely interested in you. And that now has this synergy with the corporate work that you do, the keynote speaking that you do, but also for those corporates in terms of them being able to see relationships with end users at the end of the day.
For sure. And I think that also comes into the idea that if you acknowledge and recognize that, so much of the business development journey is built on relationships, and relationships take a while to mature and nurture, even in, this hyper, digitally connected world. A lot of times for me, what I was thinking about was not only a potential customer, but thinking about, okay, where else can I, mirror the work that I'm doing, but that who doesn't know who I am, right? And so even for right now, in the world I live at speaking, the speaking world is the most business development heavy job I've ever had in my life, because pretty much no matter what, or very rare, does a client hire you back-to-back years. And so no matter how well you do on stage during that one presentation, you get off, you blow their mind, they're excited, and they kind of send you on your way, because that, they it's constantly recurring. And so for me, one of the things that it's been nice to kind of tap into is that, on my roadmap for 2021 and 2022 is I have industries and brands that right now I'm promoting their content. I'm sharing things that they're doing. I'm connecting with their executives, highlighting some of them that are going on. I have a couple executives I'm interviewing on a new podcast next month. And it might look weird for my audience today being like, why is Brian interviewing them? But I can tell you my goal in 2022 is to be speaking on their stage at their corporate events. And I think that is an important element in this, when you're working with the corporate world, especially, is that it's hard, it's great to, have those champions, but to find the champion that you can build a rapport with, and also a champion that has the weight to throw around to truly back you up, right? And it's, as someone, you worked in corporate as well, I can tell you it's great to be a champion, but there is a point when you're working in corporate world where sometimes you have to, make a decision and say, what's best for me in this corporate role compared to what's best with those that I'm working with outside. And so, that relationship, the stronger that relationship is with the champion, the more likelihood it is that you aren't going to be blindsided. And I've had a couple scenarios where someone's been promoted or someone changed companies and everything fell apart on my side. But for the most part, creating that long-term, investing in that relationship, sometimes years in advance, has done me, value in ways that I couldn't only imagine.
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody is human. And I think, so often people get worried about business development because they're like, oh, it's going to be salesy, or I'm going to have to cold call or anything like that. And the reality is, you're dealing with humans. And if you can hold a basic conversation with somebody, you should be able to do this relatively naturally. You know, developing rapport with people is about identifying common interests or common goals, or, you know, even sometimes mutual dislikes. It's not about trying to be somebody that you're not. And I think that's often where people can get a little bit caught up, taking it back to what you said right back at the beginning of the episode around authenticity, and, you know, how can we be vulnerable but also authoritative. You know, it really is about showing up as yourself, bringing what you can to the table, positioning yourself as that credible sales partner, but also being somebody who is transparent enough to say when the gig is not for you. You know, and being able
Yes.
to step back and say, do you know what, that's not the right fit for me, it's not a good idea. Or pushing back on organizations, like when you were saying earlier, you pushed back on Dell, being, instead of being the yes person, being the transparent individual that gives them genuine consultative advice, that then positions you as the authority regardless of what you're out there posting on social.
Yeah, and it's funny, even if you would interview or talk to the people that at Dell, they've heard me tell that story before, and they're like, Brian, just so you know, it was less about you proving us that the value you had, and more so the fact that you were willing to stand up
Yes.
and push back. And you're right, that kind of, you know, justifies what you were saying there, because there is that element, right? It's a very important element to also understand, in the sense of, you know, staying true to who you are. You know, as someone, you know, I get hired as an influencer. In many cases, I'm doing 2 events next month where, yes, I'm speaking at the event, but they're hiring me to do content creation, to amplify. I'm going to do some, you know, fireside chats with some of their executives. And interestingly enough, for me, the number one advice I give to anyone that is in the, you know, looking at the influencer type space, is that you have to be committed to knowing your trust value and being willing to say no to things that don't make sense. And I said no to 2 of the largest influencer opportunities that I was ever offered, one in 2016, one in 2018. And both of them hurt. It was not the easiest no's I've had to say. I had to really, you know, think about it. And I'm very glad that I said no to those, because it's allowed me to kind of continue on the path that I've been on now. But I can tell you, at the time, I wasn't in a financial place to saying no to, you know, 6 figures worth of influencer work, but it was for a skinny jean company that was really focused on our target demographic, that not only, you know, maybe I reached the demographic, but the type of content they created was so far outside of the norm of what I create that I couldn't see a way of it not jeopardizing the trust that I had with my community. And so I turned that down. And I think that's the same, you know, in your work today. And I think on top of that, the other piece of it is working with corporate clients. For me, there's so many different ins or paths to becoming, you know, working with a corporate, where you can work with through an agency, you can team up with an executive, you can come in through, you know, a traditional way. And it's, you know, it's interesting when I'm going through like taxes or going through my paperwork, it's always funny when I'm brought on as like an approved vendor, or when I'm connected to the, you know, the different groups. And sometimes it's like months or years after the fact. And they're like, wait a second, you weren't brought on through this, you know, process. I was like, no, I did this, you know, I did this work, which led into this work, which is, I think, part of the beauty as well, where I think, you know, we often assume that the online entrepreneur world gives us endless opportunities to reach endless people. But I would argue that the corporate world does that as well, as if you're willing to get creative on your path to that internal champion.
I absolutely think so. It's so interesting for me. And one of the questions that I guess I have for you is around that idea of impact. So I often hear people say to me, well, I want to make more of an impact, and that's why I want to be an online marketer. And for me, that's really shifted. I mean, I've had my business 6 years now, and I've been really fortunate to impact thousands of hundreds of thousands of people in the online space. And that's been awesome. But I go into a global company and I'll do a couple of days worth of training, and I'll probably impact more people in that company than I will impact in, I don't know, maybe 2 months online, because those organizations are putting those trainings out globally. It's hitting, you know, management, which then rolls down into, you know, the end users or the end staff that are going to be impacted by that program. And so I think impact is a huge thing to consider, you know, as alongside the lead generation prospect, because, you know, another thing that we come up against in the online world is that everyone wants to be an author or a speaker or whatever. And they seem to feel that that's not necessarily going to help them attract corporate clients. But the reality is, you can speak for leads, for corporate leads, just as well as you can for online marketing ones. You can create a book that becomes your business card for corporate leadership, just as well as you can create a book that becomes a business card for online marketing. Do you see what I mean? It's that idea of impact. And I'd be interested to know whether you feel that there is more impact in one area or another, or whether you feel that actually there's more of a synergy between the two than perhaps we initially imagined.
So it's funny. I love it. I love where you're going with this, because I have a very, I really believe that the facade or the appearance of what entrepreneurship was in 2000, let's just say 2012 to 2017, the marketing of entrepreneurship was really this idea of, don't work for the man, make global impact, make a difference, control your hours, feel like you have worth in the world, all of these things. And it's so funny to me, because when I'm working with some corporate clients, or advising even those that speak on the corporate level, most of the time I'm actually advising against them becoming an entrepreneur based on the things that they want to accomplish. Yeah. And it's so interesting, because they're like, wait a second, Brian, like, you're when I'm like, well, let's take a step back. And I think it comes down to, what is your version of success? Yeah. And when someone says the word impact, right? Impact is an interesting word, because impact is different for each person, right? What does it mean to impact people, right? And for a lot of us, because the entrepreneur false advertising that had gone on for so long made it seem as though that your connection to feeling the results of your work was stronger as an entrepreneur than it was working with a client or working in a corporate job, to me is completely wrong. It's something that, entrepreneurs were selling to inspire fellow entrepreneurs, that created this like grass is greener, wow, they can make this impact. But I am completely on your side as well. The ability to have not only a captured audience, but even a larger vehicle to extend your message, in many cases, not only facilitates a greater impact, but it also broadens your exposure to additional opportunities, additional work that you could possibly be doing. I've traveled to 76 countries in my career, and 54 of them were when I worked at the U.S. government and the work that I was doing. But since then, the next 22 of them were facilitated based on the corporate clients that I was working with, that really gave me exposure. And so a lot of times people will look at my personal brand and the hundreds of thousands of followers and the podcast and the content that I put out, but I am not shy at associating the fact that the work that you can do with corporate clients not only can help you make a bigger impact outside of the corporate world, but also the impact internally. And I think we're seeing a lot more shift to that now. Which I love. I think it's a great thing for your clients, because I believe the greatest internal corporate champions are those that have an entrepreneurial mindset, but aren't living the entrepreneur world, which really to me is like the most beautiful element of it. Like, if I didn't have to chase down clients, do taxes, invoices, and manage a lot of these other things that come along with entrepreneurship that no one really tells you about, it would kind of be like the most beautiful piece of both worlds. But I do kind of feel as though there are a lot of corporate champions today that understand the mindset of an entrepreneur and want to align themselves with those people. And I think that's kind of the beauty now, where previously I feel like there was kind of this false advertising on what entrepreneurship facilitated versus really what your opportunities are depending on who you're working with and even the work that you want to accomplish.
I really love that. Thank you. I could honestly have this conversation with you all day long. And genuinely, I'm fully expecting to buy you at least 3 beers so I can continue
yes.
this at Atomicon. That is my public promise to you. If people want to know and get more Brian in their lives, which, let's face it, guys, having just listened to this, why would you not? Where can they find you?
So I just launched a new speaker site, which actually is the home to my blog and will be the home of my podcast. It's brianfanzo.com. So just first name, last name, brianfanzo.com. And then on social, I'm iSocialFans with a Z or a Z. at the end. I'm iSocialFans on every social channel. I'm very active on every network, not because I advise clients to be on everywhere, but I feel it's kind of my duty to be everywhere so that I can help advise my clients on where they should probably be most strategically. So I always say, whichever your favorite social network is, anything from Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn to TikTok, and I've actually have a newfound love for Reddit recently.
Ooh, I
Give me
love
a follow. Yeah, give me a follow there on whatever channel is your favorite. It's the letter I, Social Fans, with a Z at the end. And my podcast that's focused on marketing is called FOMO Fans, the fear of missing out. So FOMO Fans, it's a weekly show where I help cure your fear of missing out around entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and I try to keep it fun. There's no interviews; it's just me talking for about 30 minutes or so. But this is my third year doing that, so this was a lot of fun. I told you before the show, the messaging and how you craft your business and the value that you can provide for your clients is probably one of the most unique I've heard. And I do a lot of interviews and do a lot of connections. And to me, I think it's evident in this conversation where I can tell you this conversation I have not heard happening enough. And I believe the value here is beautiful. So I really appreciate you having me on.
I really appreciate you coming on and delving into the value. And guys, please do go over. I know that you'll have key takeaways from this episode. I always say, tag me and our guest into an Instagram post or on Instagram stories, but Brian is everywhere. So feel free to hit him up on something really retro like Reddit, which, has some of the best subthreads I've ever seen on just
Without question.
random topics. Maybe we can start a Reddit subthread. That would be the dream. Make sure you do go and follow Brian. I've popped all of the links in the show notes for you, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thank you so much for coming on.